I'd like to welcome everyone very, very much to this evening's talk. My name is Susanna Bleakley. I'm the Chief Executive at Morecambe Bay Partnership. And Tom, who is our chair, sends his apologies for this evening, but he has to be somewhere else. So you're in my hands this evening. I think many of you know Morecambe Bay Partnership or know something about it, but just if there are people who don't know us well or don't know what we're about, we're a small charity. We have about 9 or 10 staff. We're actually just slightly expanding at the moment. We've got some projects that we need to take forward, and so we've appointed some new staff recently, and we're going to be appointing some more in the coming months. The work that we do is very much focused around celebrating and conserving Morecambe Bay and connecting local communities to the stories of the Bay, to understanding about the Bay, to one another. And also we collaborate very readily. We don't always assume that we're the people who know everything. So for instance, we're probably very well known for having created the Bay Cycleway, and we worked with Sustrans when we did that because they were an obvious partner to collaborate with. But we do readily form partnerships and work with lots of other organisations. One of the projects that we've been running for a very long time is our Beach Clean programme, and I always remember how long it's been running because it started and we had our first Beach Clean officer just as I was about to go off on maternity leave, and I only have one daughter and she's 17 now, so I know for a fact that that programme is more than 17 years old. So there have been people doing work to care for and look after Morecambe Bay for a long time, and in those 17 years we've kept a sort of tally of the amount of litter we've picked up. There've been particularly bad periods. In fact, during the time when cockling was at its height, there was an awful lot of additional litter and stuff being left on the beaches. Over the time that we have been doing that programme, the percentage of plastic that we pick up is ever increasing. It was about 60% of everything we picked up in the old days, and now 17, 18 years further on, tends to be about 80% of what we pick up. And it used to be that the polythene bag, the carrier bag, was completely and utterly ubiquitous. And after the plastic bag tax, we noticed that carrier bags were fewer, but plastic bottles were the next thing that we were picking up all the time. In fact, there is a particular kind of plastic bottle that is about yay big. It's a sort of short, stubby plastic bottle, green, with a star on the neck. And they were part of the cargo of the River Dance, which was a ship that foundered off the shore of Cleveland, what, about 9 years ago, maybe 7 years ago now. In fact, we find these bottles even now, and we know exactly where they came from because they were part of that cargo. So beach litter is sometimes fascinating, as well as generally not a good thing. And right now, we are asking everybody who can to help us, because we have entered into a sort of international competition to secure additional funding for the work that we're doing around beaches. And Michelle is just helpfully sharing the screen. We have been shortlisted. We are one of 5 marine projects that has been shortlisted through an organisation called the European Outdoor Clothing Association. And we have to get the most public votes to win for Morecambe Bay. And you can all help us. You can all vote. You can see there's a link there. Or if you go to any of our social media, if you go to our Facebook, if you go to our Instagram, if you go to our Twitter, if you go to our website, you will find links that you can use to vote. We got an update this morning which said we were in 2nd place, which tragically is not going to cut it. We need to get the most votes. So I'm going to urge you all. And did I notice somebody was from a school, even if it was a nursery school? Could we all think about how we can rally votes? Because at the moment, there's some Brazilian canoeists who seem to be in the lead. Now, I'm sure they're wonderful and I'm sure all the projects are worthy, but obviously we're keen to win. We've put a lot of effort in. And What this funding will do is it will help us ramp up and scale up our work around beach cleans, and in fact extend them to some of the footpaths and the cycleways around the bay. At the moment, of course, there haven't been any cross bay walks, but assuming they come back in future, what we'd like to do is work very closely with organisers for cross bay walks to make sure that they are running plastic free events. I think anybody who's been on a cross bay walk in the past may have seen organisers handing out carrier bags with various things in, including plastic water bottles, some of which inevitably are going to end up back on the beaches. So work with organisers and with other challenge events. So huge drive to ramp up the numbers of people taking part in litter picks, the range of places where these litter picks are taking part, so not just on beaches, but on footpaths and cycleways, and even in our villages. And of course, the tragedy that we have seen just in the last few months is that I talked about how the carrier bag was overtaken by the plastic drinks bottle. Well, right now, the disposable mask has overtaken all of these. We are finding more disposable masks than almost any other kind of litter. And it doesn't look pretty in our villages or on our coastline. And it seems very sad that we are finding them and that people feel that somebody else should be picking them up. So a big sort of campaign on that. So it's an incredibly worthy cause. So if any of you have networks, whether it's a U3A group or a Men in Sheds discussion group, or if you're involved in Girl Guides, or if you've got friends who are in any of these kinds of networks, if you can find a way to get in touch with us or to share our call for people to vote for our project, and let's just see if we can pip those Brazilian paddlers. Having said that, I would like to turn to the main subject for this evening, which is a talk about some of the stories around Morecambe Bay. And Michelle Cooper, I would like to introduce. Michelle has been with Morecambe Bay Partnership for maybe 7 years, 6 years. And she is currently our team leader in the communities and volunteering team. And she instigated and led a programme of collecting oral histories, which are people's stories, people's spoken word stories. Oral histories are so important because they are a record of the sort of stuff that typically doesn't get written down. And anybody who's a historian knows that there's only certain types of things that form historical archives. Records of people buying and selling land and property and getting married and births and deaths, all that sort of stuff very often gets written down, sometimes people's letters. But the very personal, how people were feeling about things, how people, people's personal stories very often doesn't get written down. And this is the magic of oral histories, as you pick up a lot of this. Michelle has collected or instigated a program of volunteer collecting of a whole range of stories, and some of those stories are around the fishing industry and some of them are other stories, but we're particularly keen to keep that moving. And right now we are particularly interested to collect stories around landscape and nature. But without saying too much myself, I'd like to hand over to Michelle.
Thank you very much, Susanna. Yes, I think collecting oral histories has to be the best job in the world, really, as far as I'm concerned. It's what a privilege it is to listen to people tell their own story and share their knowledge and their passions and their sadnesses and the happy times, and so many unique stories around Morecambe Bay have been collected into this sound archive. And what I'm going to share this evening is a range of recordings, little extracts, 2 minutes long at most each, from 2 different projects that we ran over the last kind of 4 years, really. So the first was the Catching Tales Fishing Stories from Morecambe Bay programme, which was an amazing project led largely by volunteers. Volunteers went out and about around the bay, finding people, interviewing them about the fishing heritage. Fishing is in decline in Morecambe Bay, and there's only a handful really of commercial fishermen left. So it seems really quite an urgent project that we should try and collect stories, this unique part of Morecambe Bay's history, something that really characterises the bay, people who walk out, fish on foot, people who remember fishing with horse and cart before tractors and quad bikes came along, people who remember when hundreds of boats were going out for Morecambe fishing rather than just the 2 that we have today. It was a different world, and it felt really urgent that we try and collect those tales. So thank you immensely to all the volunteers who came forward to be recorded and also who collected the stories. The other project, the Morecambe Bay Lives, was very different. That was an intergenerational project, and it was actually about getting school children talking to older people from their particular patch of the bay, be it their village, their town, and they held tea parties, they learned to do oral history, the children, and they interviewed the older people themselves. And the older people found out about how the young people live in these places today, and they exchanged experiences, and it was wonderful. And along the way, we found some great people to do more formal interviews with as well. And they all have a unique Morecambe Bay story to tell. So it might be it's a particular bay industry they worked in, it might be they're from the Coast Guard or the rescue services, something to do with the lighthouses. It's something particular that's unique to Morecambe Bay, and that's what we were going for in that project. So it's a little bit of a mixture from both of these projects. It's an eclectic mix. I love people's stories, so I've just picked stories I liked that I thought showed people's personalities and that made me smile. But there's a million stories we could have told. There's technical fishing tales, there's stories about the Port Commission, there's all sorts of technical things that we could have shared too, but I like people's stories, so that's what you're going to get tonight. So I hope you can hear the sound okay, and we're going to make a start on our little guided tour around the bay of different people's stories, and we're starting of course in the west and over in Barrow, and we're going to work our way around down to Sunderland Point. That's the plan. It'll be about 40 minutes probably of me leading you. So our first stop in Barrow is Dennis Vaughan. Now Dennis had an amazing memory, which must be one of his earliest memories, because I think he was 5. He was born in 1931. And he remembers the Zeppelin coming over, and that's what he's sharing in this extract.
Another memorable memory from that was the Graf Zeppelin coming over. That was be about 1936. And the guy next door knocked on the door and said, "Come and have a look at this, come and have this." And then this was this enormous airship right over the street. It really blocked out the light, and it just cruised slowly above the street, and we just stood there and wondered. We found out later why. It was doing a reconnaissance for the Luftwaffe, and in Barrow Museum you can see the pictures that it took and the maps that it made, including Milham. So that was quite a memorable thing.
And the Barrow News at the time, there was a news report about it, and it said it flew over, it passed over Barrow at 7:25 p.m. at a moderate speed, but very low. A registration number and name could clearly be read by people in Dalton Road and towards Greengate Street. Her passage over the shopping centre of Barrow aroused great interest and excitement. Every detail of her hull could be made out, and the deep note of her engines was the first intimation of her arrival. What a spectacle for a 5-year-old boy. Stayed with him all these years. Staying in Barrow, of course, we couldn't have stories from Barrow without collecting some from the shipyards, and we interviewed John Murphy. Many of you may know John. He's the guide over to Peel Island, has led many a walk for Morecambe Bay Partnership, and he remembers the launch days of times past, and what a spectacle it was.
Big day. The schools had enough freedom then to allow us to go up to the top of Walney Channel and watch these magnificent launches. Now, in them days, it seemed to be happening about every 6 months. There was always a ship ready to be launched in the water, and it was an incredible day because flags were out, of course. If the wind was in the east, you could hear the shipyard band play, and the tune, I still love the tune. I remember it with great fondness. Was Nimrod, was the tune from the Enigma Variations, and as a child, I've got this strong memory of this east wind and the band playing, and then these Leviathans, and they were. It's not an exaggeration. It's one of the ships 100,000 ton, the British Admiral. Seeing her coming together up on the slipways opposite our house, and then watching for that first quarter of an inch movement, little bit, and you knew then. And then of course the tugs would start hooting, and the crescendo would build up until this ship entered the channel, and then it would send out a wash, a wave, a small tsunami really of water would wash across the channel. Of course we all used to try and rush down to the front, much to the consternation of our teachers. I don't think you'd allow that now. And then the ship would be there, whichever ship it was, would be laying in the channel, and such a magnificent sight. But that was followed by a sadness, because it left an empty space. There was a space there that for the last 2-3 years perhaps had been filled by this massive metal hulk, and then that space came. But you were waiting then, because the next boat was in order, the next thing was started.
There's a fantastic collection of, if you don't know it, from Vickers Shipyard, the archive, which is available from the Dock Museum. If you go to their website, Barrow Dock Museum, you'll find many of these images, which is where these are from, and it's really worth exploring. Some great pictures. And just staying with Barrow, one more from John, just this real spectacle of the shipyard routine, familiar to many people who live in Barrow, but perhaps less so for those further afield. And what a sight it was, everybody going to work at the same time. But it wasn't a routine for John. It was not the path he chose to take. Here he talks about it.
And I can remember, very easily remember, and so many Barrovians I remember, at 7:25 every morning, the buzzer rang. Our buzzer didn't ring, it blew. Quite a loud buzzer, lasted for a minute. This was to call the workers to the lathes. And that was at 7:25, and then it was followed very briefly at 7:30 by a secondary buzzer to say, start work. And I've got the memory of all these stereotype working class men walking over the bridge with the flat caps, big clown boots on, blue overalls, all walking over the bridge at 7:15 en masse. You know, there was 16,000 people working the shipyard, and bikes. There was bikes, for more bikes than in Holland were going over that bridge each day. And it was an incredible sight. I made a promise to myself when I was leaving school, 15, 16, that I would never be part of that. I didn't want that locked-in feeling, that dictatorship of there's the buzzer, now you work, there's the buzzer, now you stop. And of course the buzzer was repeated at 12 o'clock, when the workers would rush back to Walney over the bridge, where the wives would be preparing a full roast dinner. This was sort of traditional. Midweek, so they'd have some form of dinner at 12, and then at 10 to 1 off they went back again and flooded the area with all these highly skilled men, hard men, tough men, but they went back into the shipyard and again followed the skills in the shipyard are amongst the best in the world, and still recognised to this day that if you were trained by, I think it was Vickers then, if you were trained by Vickers, you were one of the best tradesmen in the world.
I didn't have a picture of roast dinners at home, so that's one from the canteen at the shipyards there, eating their lunch. Okay, so we're going to hop along now. I told you it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but we're going to hop along to Ulverston next. We have lots of recordings of places in between, but it's just a few highlights I've picked out. So we worked a lot with Ulverston Canal Regeneration Group on the project, and worked with a school down there as well. And it was so interesting hearing the experiences people who live down at Canal Foot. And here's a group interview that we did with 3 residents from Canal Foot, and they're talking about the canal and how people learned to swim in the canal and some of the hijinks that people got up to.
Well, you see, when we first came here, there were lock gates on there, weren't there?
Yes, yes. Oh, yes. And the amount of people that used to dive off the locks there into the... I never was that brave, even though I was
had to be brave.
Yes.
You had to be brave.
But the nets for swimming, so many people used to walk down on a nice day.
They still do. Oh, no.
But we used to have them in the... It must have been about the 80s, 70s, 80s, when they used to have the raft race.
Oh, yes,
yeah.
I remember.
Which was great fun. Everybody used to make rafts and bring them all the way down the canal, and they had to negotiate under the bridge, because the bridge halfway down is quite a special bridge. It's a rolling bridge, and I think there's only one left, or one other left in the world, so it's quite a special thing, and it's listed now. Oh man, we used to get into trouble, didn't we, because where we lived there was a way of getting to that bridge through the Elms, which was a big house owned by Glaxo, and if you sneaked through the field and got over the gate, you could get to the railway bridge, and we could cross the canal even though we weren't supposed to.
And I was such a stupid girl. I used to pretend that
You were a ballet dancer.
yeah, on the actual strut
I never
over
did
the
that.
over the canal. How stupid
I was
was
very
I?
sensible. I never did that.
Pretty narrow bits of metal on that bridge to be ballet dancing over the top, but I like that extra because it just shows how there are certain places around the bay that are special to people, and it was something that we did in the exhibition we held in 2018, was what's your special place and why, and what's the memory, and it just shows points of connection for people, and that was definitely one for them. Okay, now we're going to go to Flukeborough. Lots of interviews from Flukeborough because of the fishing, it being the centre of fishing for that side of Morecambe Bay, real rich fishing heritage. Place where, as I say, people went fishing with horse and cart, and now still go by tractor and quad bike. And of course, I have to start with our very much missed friend Jack Manning. Jack was such a huge influence on this project. He is someone who collected the heritage of the fishing story himself, had his own archive, was so generous to share it with us. And his is a wonderful interview, and if you're stuck at home, nothing better to do, go to the website and just listen to Jack's whole interview, because it's absolutely fascinating. And this is a little bit about his early experiences of fishing from Flukeborough.
Yeah, my first memories are going out with my grandfather when I was probably only 5 or 6 years old, going out with a horse and cart across the sands to nets that had been set out there, and we would go to look at them and take the fish out and straighten them up and so forth. And because when I was young, before the Second World War, my father had gone to work at the steelworks at Barrow for a while, because fishing was so bad at that time, it was difficult to make a living. So it was mainly with my grandfather and uncles that I started to learn about fishing. And when I became sort of 10 years old, I used to go with my uncle, my mother's brother. By that time my father was in the Royal Navy anyway, called up in the Second World War. But I used to go with my uncles, and particularly my Uncle Bill, my mother's brother, and I learnt fishing from him mainly. He was an excellent fisherman. And I used to go with him, and you were expected to work like men. You know, you didn't go there and play as a boy. You had to work. I also remember cockling was a very hard job, manual hard job. And sometimes the sand could be nearly as hard as concrete. You were banging on it and it would be really hard, and sometimes it would be quite soft and sort of half quicksand, if you like. But I remember saying to my Uncle Bill one day, "It's hard here, Uncle Bill." And he would say, "Aye, but thou'll have to be as hard as it is." And that was all the answer you got. No sympathy at all. And if you were going out early in the morning, say 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, just give you a shout and you had to bounce out of bed and go. But I really enjoyed it. And I enjoyed working with those men who had been fishermen all their lives and knew every aspect of it, and one learned quickly from people with that experience.
I should say those are all images that Jack shared from his own archive. They're his photos that he collected, so nice to share them. Wish he could tell you the stories himself. Staying in Flukeborough, a few more fishing tales, some of my favourites. They say never work with, children and animals. Of course, they were working with horses, and there's a real fondness that comes through the archive of remembering the time when people were fishing with horses. They were companions, I guess, out on the sands, and they all had their own personalities, it would seem. And here are the Butler brothers, Bill and Derek, who shared stories about their horse called Tom.
Did they have personalities?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, they did. Tom was a case in point. He was funny. He didn't have a nasty bone in its body, but it was a big horse. And when you had it in its booth in the stable, you would go alongside it and give it some oats or whatever, and be feeding it into its manger, or pull something down from the loft into its hay rack in front of it. And then it'd be eating, and you'd start to walk out, and it would just move across and have you pinned against the ruddy wall.
For 10 minutes.
Yeah, it would just be leaning, and you're not very heavy, but you're struggling and you try to shove the thing, and he used to just do it on purpose. But wasn't being nasty.
Wanted company.
Wanted company, probably.
One of the best laughs I remember was when they got back from shrimping, what they used to do was disconnect the cart so that the horse isn't stood there with the cart on it all the time. But they didn't have time to take all harnesses off. They disconnect it from the cart, then get on with boiling shrimps and such like. And our mother, on a regular basis, when horse was out, used to come out with crust off emmet loaf and feed it. And bloody horses obviously get used to this, and mother wasn't there one day. I think she'd gone down to the shop or something and left back door open. So the bloody horse, and it steps down into the kitchen. The bloody horse had gone down into the kitchen, long narrow corridor type kitchen, and they don't like going backwards up steps, and there was no room for it to reverse, no room to turn around, no room for anything. There was our father and grandfather smacking hell out of it with hats on nose on its face to make it go backwards. Anything. And it was I thought that was funny at the time.
They certainly did work hard, these horses, but they also were the source of some incidents, shall we say. And just to give you an idea, by the way, yes, I forgot I put this slide in. This is just an extract from Gerald Benson's interview. Unfortunately, I couldn't edit the sound. I didn't have access to the master file at home, but a bit from the transcript here, just to show you the hard work and the effort involved in working alongside horses. So he talks about his grandfather who would walk to Appleby from Fluteborough to buy a horse, and then would ride it back and get back in time for a pint in the local pub. And the horse would plough for them as well, a bit of farming on the side. But the sort of the rigmarole, if you like, of getting the horse ready, particularly if there was an early morning tide, of making sure you have the horse in the stable ready to go. You wouldn't have to go out and catch it from the field or whatever. So it was hard going, but certainly company for them out on the sands. But this is the comical one: horses and water and young children. Quite a recipe.
I went shrimping when I was 4 years old, but just sitting in the car with my dad. And they used to sit up on the front. The cart has a flat board at the front, and you just sit on that out of the way. Your feet are outside the cart on one of the shafts down the side of the horse.
Kicking the horses,
well, doing all sorts of poor old horse, pestering the poor old horse. But I don't know whether you want memories, but I remember when I was young, not 4 or 5, but young, sort of still in single figures. I went fishing, shrimping with my dad. I used to go with my granddad early on, but my dad, and I was sitting in the front, and we'd gone on a night tide, which you don't often do. It's only certain times of the year where you get the shrimps coming to the side, and you trawl in shallower water in the dark. And we were, he was fishing, and I was sitting on the front. As I say, you go down the water, you go in the same way as the water, so you just have to go a bit faster than the flow of the water. And when you fish the net, you actually stop, and the net is easy to pull back up to the cart, and then the fisherman has to lean over and get hold of the top of the beam and lift it up onto the back of the cart, at which point the horse has to set off so that the net itself doesn't go underneath the cart and get tangled up. And all the fishermen would do is just click, you know, and the horse would set off. So just as you're lifting it up, you're going, and the horse would set off and everything's fine. Well, I was sitting up the front and my dad's leaning over the back to me and I just went, and the horse set off. And he went head first off the back into waist deep water in the middle of November. Night, stars out. You could hear his castanets chattering all the way home. And I wasn't in good order for a while.
It's one of my favourite interviews, that one. So we're going to leave fishing behind for a minute and move on over just past Grange to Home Island. It was great to have the chance to include an interview with Gillian Aspin, who used to actually live on Home Island. And here's just a little nice short piece about some of the secrets on Home Island.
There was also a smuggler's cave on the island, and there still is a smuggler's cave on the actual side of the island that can't be seen from here. It's about the size of a suitcase. We never went in, but it was about that size. And evidently it was because the main customs place was at Heversham, and evidently the boats that used to come up when larger boats came used to post some contraband in there and then collect it afterwards again. In our days, the salmon was the only contraband, because of course you weren't allowed unless you had a licence. But of course the local people didn't really think they'd apply it to them, so we always had an hot sandwich too, because they used to give them to us. I can remember them flapping in the sink at night. But they used to hide them there and then come back when they knew the warden wasn't around with his glasses and take them and go.
I've also heard stories through this project of people hiding salmon inside their own Wellington boots and things when they were taking salmon that they shouldn't have been. So it was a child who told me that story. Better not mention who it was. Okay, going to a little bit more about children now, from stories from Silverdale.
The early days I used to...
Sorry. This is the Leeds Children's Holiday Home, which no longer exists. It closed in 2016, but it had been bringing children over from a Leeds children's charity for, I think, over 100 years, I think, and giving deprived children basically a week-long holiday by the sea. And someone suggested for the project it would be nice to interview a couple of the volunteers who'd worked there and worked with the children, and which we were really pleased to do. And here's just a couple of volunteers reminiscing.
The early days I used to give them Easter eggs, and I put them all in little boxes, and I went to Carnforth Station to hand these over that particular time. They were going home, and the manager at the camp, Linda, she said to all the children, she said, "This is the lady who's given you all the Easter eggs." So they were all coming up saying thank you, and one little girl said to me, "I don't want to go home." And I said, "Well, you know, you'll have to." I said, "Is your home?" And she said, "Well, I don't. I've been so happy. I've never had an Easter egg before." And she'd be about 9, this child. It was amazing. I just couldn't believe it.
We had another little boy that he got off the coach. It's funny, is this? He got off the coach on Monday and the tide was in. You know, you could see it just over the field. And he had the day, and they were going to the swimming pool the following morning. He came out and he stopped dead in the middle of the forecourt, and he looked and he said, "Who's pulled the plug out?" You know, there was no sea there or anything, and he didn't realise that there was a tide and it went in and out. You know, they come out with really daft statements, but yeah, it's true to them. They haven't a clue.
I found a statistic actually which said that since 1932 the centre had catered for the needs of over 60,000 children who've been given a much needed holiday over in Silverdale. So some wonderful stories there. Staying in the area of Silverdale and the AOMB, quite late on in the project we had the chance to interview someone from Leighton Moss. Some of you may know him, John Wilson, and he was actually the first ranger or warden at Leighton Moss, and he's really interesting to listen to, particularly if you're interested in birds, because he talks about how the birds have changed and how the landscape has changed, particularly around Wharton Marsh and the slag banks, and how bird life has declined for sure. So if any of you have been following Amy's talks about the birds of the bay, you might be interested to listen more to this interview. But here, I was interested in his first experiences of working at Leighton Moss. I think he started in the mid-60s, about 1964, I think. And certainly the recruitment and training was rather different than we would do today.
Was Leighton Moss completely new when you went to?
Absolutely, yes, yeah. I mean, I was really lucky because they'd actually appointed 2 different people as warden, and both of them had turned it down. One surprisingly came up from Norfolk, and he said he didn't like the hills. I think the main reason was that there was a rather dominant gamekeeper there at that time, and I don't think he thought he could get on with him. So actually the RSPB asked if anybody locally was interested, and I was at that time the youngest committee member of the Lancaster Birdwatching Society, and they suggested that I apply, and the interview actually took just was in the form of walking around Leighton Moss and identifying birds, and I then was given the job. I started on May the 15th rather, and that 1964, and nobody met me. Nobody told me what to do. I just went and did what I felt was best. I had no real contact until about a month later, and I had no training until the following September. You know, compare that with what would happen today. They go on about 18 different courses.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So what did you do in your first couple of months then?
Well, I mean, I'd been told in the letter that I've got to protect the area. So that was the main focus at that time, that people to protect it, to stop egg collectors, and also to find out what there was there. Those were the 2 important things, and obviously to get to know the area. And also we realised we were going to develop it as a visitor attraction. So we started, in fact I built the first hide on the causeway from my own materials. And then the following winter we had 2 further hides built, which again, money was incredibly short in those days. You know, we built the lower hide, which was out into the reeds, and we obviously had to have a causeway to it. And so I said, well, you know, can we buy some wood? And they actually said, well, sorry, we've run out of money. So I actually found a local member who had some sleepers, and we built a track like that. And even then I said, well, the sleepers are slippy, can we have some wire netting? And they said, no, we haven't got any money for that. That was our, you know, yeah.
Incredible.
I mean, a colleague of mine tells the best story of all, that he phoned up and wanted to get some nails and a hammer, and they said, well, you can buy the nails, but you've got to borrow the hammer.
It's been wonderful discovering lots of unusual occupations and sort of Morecambe Bay jobs that perhaps different to other places, and that's certainly one of them. But we also had a chance to interview a man called David Kettlewell, and his father Edgar was the head gardener at the Heining estate, Heining Hall, which was traditionally the seat of Lord Peel. It's now a Benedictine monastery, I think, a convent. But here he was a child at the time, but used to help out in the grounds, and he talks about being wary of encountering Lord Peel.
Apart from the edging off the lawn, which was my job in the holidays, and my dad used to say, you can go and do the red walk, and that was stretched from one side of the gardens right the way around the edge. It was all shale, red shale path. I used to start at one end and go along with the edge trimmers, trim all the edge of the lawn, and then go and pick all the bits up and make sure it was all nice, neat and tidy. And if Lord Peel or Lady Peel came out, Lady Peel wasn't too bad. She'd been a nurse during the war, and she'd nursed Lord Peel. He'd had a leg injury. And but if you saw Lord Peel, you have to go and hide in the bushes turn your back on him. He didn't speak to staff. It was the old school, you know, you were there to do the work, and but you weren't to be spoken to, or you couldn't speak to him, you weren't allowed. So if you knew it was coming, you used to go and hide in the bushes.
Was that the same for your dad as well, being the head gardener? Did he speak to your dad?
He would speak to my dad, but only like by appointment, you know. He used to have the meetings once a week. But he wouldn't acknowledge my dad if he saw him in the gardens. But my dad used to be, yes my lord, no my lord, that kind of thing, you know. But any other gardeners, no, he would not speak to them. And every morning he used to go for a swim. They had an outdoor pool just behind where the greenhouses were. And usually about between 8 and 9 o'clock in the morning, he used to go. And he'd have his towel and robe on, you know, and go down for a swim. Now, if you knew what didn't work that area where he walked for in that time. It was unbelievable, really. It was very old-fashioned, very old school. But his two boys were totally different.
There's just some photographs there from the AUMB report, actually, about the gardens, and you can sort of see how glorious they would have been, and that's the area they were working in. So we're going to move around now to Morecambe. A million stories from Morecambe, do a whole talk on Morecambe, but sticking with unusual jobs, another one of my favourites, which is Mrs. Carrick. And Mrs. Carrick was an aqua lovely at the Super Swimming Stadium.
Could you just explain what a show would look like? What would you be doing?
Well, in the show, we had quite a few girls when I first started, but of course it dwindled down because of money, because I think we were paid by the council. And so we had quite a few what we call spots, you know, so we had lovely flowered hats on and different suits for each one, so we had quick changes, and we had to do synchronised swimming basically. We'd make patterns in the water, and quite complicated, so you need to be strong. And then there was divers, and they dived off at 10 metre boards. And then there was what they call the aqualoonies, and they used to jump and do silly things, you know. And actually I had to do a few silly things a couple of times. And we had a trampoline, so I had to do a bit of an act on the trampoline with two of the men, and my skirt was going up and silly things like that. It wouldn't be allowed now, they'd be calling it, I don't know what. And we had a lot of fun, but the water was freezing, absolutely. Sometimes we didn't want to go in, but we had to, and it was absolutely freezing. In May, we had to do the rehearsals on the stage, and then we had to go in and do this in freezing cold water again. But we had to walk through each one was different. One was a Spanish influence, or a Greek we've done, or different things. So we had to learn a little bit of dancing as well on the stage. Then we'd dive in, and do the synchronised swimming. We did lots and lots of different things, and there was a bathing beauties on the Wednesday, and we met a lot of the stars there because they came to judge. We'd be changing in that time because we had to do a swim before and a swim after for the public. So we used to see the bathing beauties coming down with no makeup on and the headscarves on, and we didn't think they looked particularly great because we had to go in freezing water, you know. It felt like saying, go and do a couple of lengths, see what you look like afterwards. And then they came out looking all glamorous with all this tan stuff on. So I met Adam Faith in the gents' changing rooms. We had to run from our changing room right through to get to the other side of the pool, and he was walking towards us with our producer. He was very nice. And he said, he had an overcoat on. He said, are you to go in that water? We said, yes. And we met various people, Huey Green and the Bachelors, different people. So it was fun, you know. And I actually went home and just cooked the tea like a boring housewife. Do you know what I mean?
And the boy that was being thrown off the diving board in that earlier photograph is actually a man called Charlie Overett, who's brilliant, a great help with the project. And he is such an interesting gentleman, and he was a fisherman. He learnt his fishing skills in Morecambe Bay. He went on to captain massive container ships all around the world. But he also was a pilot in the Cross Bay Swim when he was a young lad. And here he is recounting the Cross Bay swims, and particularly the swim where he helped support Gerald Forsberg swim from Fleetwood to Morecambe, and also Dorothy Perkins as well.
To swim from Fleetwood to Morecambe, and I got him 7 minutes ahead of his estimated time.
So you were guiding him by being in the boat?
Yeah, I had a trawler, then I had a small rowing boat, but I was guiding the small rowing boat, which Raymond Edmondson was rowing from Yorkshire Street.
Oh, the fisherman.
Yeah. He went in my rowing boat, but I kept telling him this way, that way with my bigger trawler. And what it was, there was a buoy off the harbour there, and you had to get that buoy on the end of the tanker pier, and that was a really good route to come up with the current. So that's what I did, I kept him on that route. Despite what he said he wanted to do, I said, no, leave it to me, and he said, all right then. And I did it by fishing route, and it took him right up there, not drifting out, not drifting in, and then got him round here and right into there.
7 minutes quicker than it
Yeah,
is.
and that's when he wrote that letter. Again, many thanks for the very underlined, confident with you in the vicinity. Look forward to swimming with you again. So I thought that's a good do, is that?
How did he contact you in the first? How did he know about you, Charlie?
I think I was just allotted with him. Probably Dick Woodhouse was the main pilot, and he said, we'll put Fosberg with Charlie. So that's how I had him. He didn't know me from Adam. But we become good friends. I mean, even bought his book and everything. I didn't think about it for years and years and years. And then suddenly you think, hey, this is a bit of an interesting guy. And then, of course, I got that letter.
And so did you do this for other people?
Yeah, Dorothy Perkins was one from Bradford. I did her across the bay. She was really happy that she made it, because a lot of them that day, when you're going down the bay, you've got the ebb tide. And like, yeah, you're heading for the jetty. But if you head for the jetty, you'll end up going down here. So you've got to go inward and then downward like that, and then nip them into the jetty so that they don't get washed away. If they did, they'd get them back in the boat, and then they haven't completed the swim. Well, I studied it with Matt, because I was a little fisherman, 14-year-old. So I thought, well, I'll cut them in here and then cut round this sandbank. And at one time she started touching the bottom with her hands. She says, I'm touching the bottom. So I just went a little bit further out with my rowing boat. But I thought, I don't want to leave this sandbank, because as soon as we drop off deep, I want her to go straight into the jetty, and then I'd have got her. And then there's 2 or 3 getting drifted away. So she was chuffed to bits. So then they contacted me again would I pilot them at the full length of Windermere. Paid me, fed me. Ooh, I was just plopping away like lovely. I thought, this is good. Right, easy roll, because no current, no swell.
Wonderful stories from Charlie. Just staying in Morecambe, some of you may have heard this extract before if you've been to any of our conferences in recent years, but it is definitely one of our favourite from the fishing archive. So this is Ernie Nicholson, and Ernie was a net maker. He was actually a one-handed net maker, because he lost a hand due to an injury, and taught himself to make nets with one hand, which seems extraordinary. But there's lots of fishermen's nicknames come out of the archive. Most Morecambe fishermen seem to have one nickname or another, and there's a bit of a misunderstanding when he was a young fisherman, which he'll tell you himself.
The chairman at the time, Seaweed.
Seaweed? What was his real name?
Willisey. I don't know if it was E. Willisey or A. Willisey, I don't know. But it was one of the Willisey family, and he was nicknamed Seaweed. And I said to Mr. Seaweed, I thought it was his name. He said, I am not Mr. Seaweed, I'm Mr. Willisey. I said, well, why did they call it? I thought you was Mr. Seaweed. Stupid boy! I said, well, I didn't know. I said, why do they call you Seaweed then? Don't ask. He said, they're a pack of rotters. You can't trust anybody in this camp. There's only me who can be trusted. So he was then I went back and I said, "One minute, I thought he was called Mr. Seaweed." So I asked R.M. Woodhouse. I said, "I just got bollocked off Mr. Seaweed." He says, "What for?" I says, "Because I said Mr. Seaweed." I said, "I'm not Mr. Seaweed. I'm Mr. Willisey." I said, I didn't know that. I said, "Why do they call him Seaweed?" He said, "Because they're stupid don't take any notice of them. None of them was any good. Said because he always moans about seaweed in the net. The only one of the fishermen, when there's a lot of seaweed about, put it all in the balls of the bottom of the net, the wooden ball going round, and net, all in the net, all wrapped round the mouth of the net, so you'd have to take it out, all in the tail end, getting it out of the shrimp nets, and if you're not careful, you'll have one of them crabs what nip, and then they don't stop till they eat. Or don't they hurt? Yeah.
As far as I could tell, half the fishermen in Morecambe seemed to be called Bob. There was Happy Bob, Old Bob, Young Bob. There were all these different Bobs. None of them were actually called Bob. I don't think. It was just loads of great nicknames came out of the project. So just last formal extract is down at Sunderland Point. Again, a centre for fishing down there, and this time we've got Margaret Owen, a very rare fisher lady around the UK, and she's a even rarer have netter or half netter. That's a half net there in that first picture, and her interview is another one that's worth just sitting down one evening and listening to the whole thing, because it's so interesting. But this time I've chosen one where she talks about having a very lucky mistake. She tells it with a joke and a smile, but she very nearly lost her life fishing out off Sunderland Point, and here's her story.
I did nearly drown once. That was just a mishap. I've been fishing with the Have beam, the 18-foot-6 beam, and I'd edged my way across the river, which I shouldn't have done, but you do. And this particular day, it was a nice day like today. It wasn't anything horrendous, but we'd had a storm the day before. And as I was coming back with the beam, I stepped back where I've always done, but there was a hole. And as I went down, the net wrapped around my feet. And in those days, I mean, now I have neoprene on, which is just one suit. But in those days, neoprene wasn't about, and I had...
So it's a wetsuit type of...
neoprene is, well, it's the chest waders, but they're nice and warm. But to keep me warm in those days, I had chest waders and like a fluffy suit underneath that just would soak water up. And I had my yellow top on, but I had a belt. But they say that, there's about 199,000 people in the world, and so many are cowards. Well, not cowards, but panic. And I happened to be with one that day. And instead of just pulling the beam in, he had a beam like mine. Instead of just pulling it towards the side, he ran to call the Coast Guard. He just ran from Sunderland Point.
Who is this?
Another chap that was having with me.
Oh, right.
And he ran up the shore, and it left me floating down the river. I grabbed his beam, and the trouble was he went to call the Coast Guard, but me and Trevor are the auxiliary local Coast Guard shouts, so I knew that the Coast Guard would be trying to ring our house to tell me to go and look. Anyway, as it happened, as Simon had got up, they got through to Liverpool, and Carl, who was over it, knew us really well. And they sent the, this is really funny. Well, it's funny to us. They sent the lifeboat straight away, because by now I'm sort of floating down. And the peculiar thing is when you're drowning, which sounds silly saying when you're drowning, but you can't see anything but water. You wouldn't believe that when you're in the water, and this suit was pulling me down. All you can see is water. And luckily for me, there was a chap called Dick Worthington fishing over by the lighthouse who couldn't swim, right? And yet he waded out with his have beam, caught hold of me and dragged me in. I mean, I was unconscious by now. But this is the funny side, right? We had an old fisherman called Harold Gardner. He's alive today, is Harold. And he used to be the pilot, you'll know. And after they took me to hospital that day, and I came home, and the next day I had to go and apologise to him, because as the boat had come up to see if it could save me, it had cut through his net, and to make matters worse, on the way back it had cut through it again, and he was rather cross, so I actually had to go and apologise for being saved to Harold.
Yes. Well, thank goodness she was. And this is Margaret. This was last year. She's a great champion for fishing and telling the heritage of fishing from Sunderland Point. And she's caught her catch of school children inside her haven net as part of a project we were running down at Sunderland Point. So she's got some great stories to tell. So that's just a few little extracts that I've enjoyed listening to. I hope you've enjoyed listening to them as well. I was thinking there's so many other things I could have shared with you, just to give you a bit of a taste of what else there is. Tales from Barrow Laundry, different industries in Barrow. Fishing with ex-military amphibious vehicles from Bolton Sands, sailing from Arnside, stories from the Coast Guard, lifeboat stations, life living in Cockersands Lighthouse, or cottages nearby, what to do when you're in charge of Heysham Port and you've got to disinfect hundreds of thousands of vehicles across a foot and mouth. What do you do when you work for the Port Commission and a giant ship hits your lighthouse and knocks it all out of kilter and you've got to work out a way to get it repaired? You know, absolutely a whole range of other stories I could have shared. So I hope you'll go and enjoy having a little look yourself. This is the website where you can find them. It's called recordingmorecambebay.org.uk. Largely put together also by volunteers. Great amount of work's gone into it, and all the oral histories and some of the extracts I've played tonight and transcripts and all sorts of information is on there for you to have a browse. There's also some more curated pieces, so there's a number of podcasts on particular themes. This one was on swimming, and you can listen to those. They're about 20 minutes each. And there's also other materials too from projects where we've used the archive to create. There's newspapers with extracts to read, there's beautiful artworks by John Fox, there's animations from the fishing hut that we did, all sorts of different things. So do have a little look. And I thought I would just finish with an extract from Fleeting, which was a soundscape, which if you were at our conference last year, you might have heard this before, but it's just quite a nice way to end. So Fleeting was put together by Fable Arts. And she took some of the memories from the fishing archive and put them together with music. And then we played it on the train line around Morecambe Bay on some special Sundays. And so you could listen to the memories and look at the landscape at the same time. And so here's a little bit of that just to finish off.
It's not a job, it's a way of life, to be honest. You certainly wouldn't be in it for the money. Although when it got to a point where you can't live, that's when we said, right, enough's enough. But no, it's just a great way of life and fulfilling, you know.
What makes it?
You've spent a day at sea, it's quite exhilarating. The weather's never the same. The sceneries can be fantastic. You never know what you're going to catch. There's all these uncertainties. And then when you do get back in, it's great. The feeling of coming home again, or going ashore after being out all day is great.
I didn't enjoy it all. There were times I could have done without, I can tell you that. But, as my father once said, he said the one thing about fishing, every day is different. You never know what you're going to get. You go out full of expectation. And sometimes that doesn't work out, it doesn't come to fruition. You've always got that hope. You set a net out and you go to it with great hope that you're going to catch a lot and it's going to make you a good wage. It doesn't always work out, unfortunately.
Today as we look out, it's grey, it's drizzly, it's damp, it's horrible. The light isn't going to change much. It was a good grounding. Yeah, don't whinge, get on with it. You'll dry out.
Plop of water. There we go. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed hearing some of that, and don't forget to vote. That's my last slide. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I certainly enjoyed that enormously, and there's lots of lovely comments from people who have enjoyed it too. I think the first question was, where can we find these stories, which you've answered in your presentation. Recordingmorecambebay.org.uk. There we go. And one of the other things, of course, is that although all the stories are there, it's only a certain type of person who's going to go to the trouble or take the effort to go to the archive and find them. So what Michelle hasn't told you about is that she went to a lot of work to bring the stories to more people, and the fleeting, the soundscape that was played on the train was just one of those efforts to bring them to more people. I'm looking through the chat, and in fact there doesn't seem to be so many questions as comments. So I don't know if there are some more questions. Have we got any questions? Anybody who would like to ask a question? I'm just wondering, Jenny Reeves, if you would like to comment on, I don't know if you can hear me, Jenny, but you did some work with the archive and translated it to reach more people. Hello, Jenny, would you like to unmute and just tell us a little bit about what you did with the fishing stories?
Yes. I do apologise, I was just eating my tea.
Oh, that's that. I've just had mine.
That was wonderful, Michelle. Thank you. It was so inspiring. Yes, with the young people, I felt that, like as you just said, Susanna, that there's only going to be a certain type of person that goes to access an oral history archive. So I wanted to make the fishing heritage really, really accessible for young people. They were Key Stage 2 particularly. And what better way to do that? I'm a dancer myself, so I thought, right, well, we'll learn it through dance, and we'll learn all the different types of fishing that the fisher folk used to do. We'll listen to some of the archive. We'll use that as an inspiration to create some movement, and we'll learn about it that way. And I'm sure you'd agree it worked really well, and I was really pleased. I think some of those children, particularly the ones that were embodying being shrimps, I think they'll remember that for the rest of their lives. So that was really, really special.
It was great, and I remember doing it at Flukeborough School and taking and that was fascinating, because obviously those children are different to children from other schools in the sense that they're the children and grandchildren of the fishing community. So we were sharing with them, but they were sharing with us too, and we were learning a lot from the younger generation as well. So it was really great experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one more thing to add, I would always ask the children from around the bay what they think of when I say fishing, and the children from Overton and Morecambe, they'd say things like, oh, fishing rods and things like this, and then you'd ask them in Flukeborough and they'd all say, oh, my granddad's tractor. And just the differences across the bay were really fascinating.
And on a particularly hot day in, was it July, early July, we did a performance when you brought together, was it 5 schools from across the bay? And there was a performance in Morecambe to the parents of the children, and they were children you'd worked with. And what was my abiding memory was that many of the fishing community, or not many, but there were some from the fishing community who were in the audience as well. And I do remember standing with Margaret Owen during the performance, and she couldn't hardly contain herself, because she said, oh, look, they're riddling now. Oh yeah, no, look at them. And she could recognize through the dance, the different styles and techniques of fishing, which was my biggest memory from that.
Do you think that 50 years from now there'll be stories about today that someone will record and share? Well, certainly there'll be the stories. I hope so. It's the ever, it's the big question of technology and whether we're going to lose things. The same with photographs and with the digital revolution, how much is going to be left behind. And I think it's something that's really special about oral history, which I hope people will continue to do in future generations, which is, it's kind of slow history. It's about taking that time to sit down with somebody one-to-one or in a small group, and it's not about images, and it's really about listening to the voice of that person and their accent and their story and their personality, and them sharing their own history, really. And I do hope there'll always be an interest and a passion for that. And hopefully people will be out there collecting it. I certainly hope so. We certainly would like to do more around Morecambe Bay. and kind of keep it going for the foreseeable future where we can, linking it to projects and getting volunteers involved again to do more. So I hope that will still be the case in 50 years' time. Don't know whether Claire has an opinion on that as an archaeologist and historian, but people will always want to collect stories, I think, but what method it will be and whether it will end up in the archives, I don't know.
Absolutely. I've just posted a link, actually, Michelle, to the YouTube playlist to the fishing stories that Hannah put together. So if anybody's interested in hearing some more of those, I think they're the ones from the point of view of a child, are they?
Yes, they are. Yeah, they'll be her animations. Thank you. Yeah, they're great.
Have a look in the chat. You can follow that link.
And one of the things that I find so fascinating about oral histories is how utterly and completely different they are from written histories. And I don't know if Pat would have a comment for us here. I bet there are people that Pat would like to interview that is not possible to do now. But in terms of the question of are oral histories going to be important in the future, if we were to take that from the perspective of a historian who is trying to understand the history of a place, any historian would be wanting to ask questions of the movers and shakers of the past and what it was like and why they made decisions and was it this or was it that, and they would probably tell you something other. I think it would be so fascinating to be able to interview people from the past. I'm sure we've all got a wish list.
Everybody remembers things differently. It can be the same event and you'll get 3 different versions of it, and that's, you know, that's real history, isn't it? That's it. It's opinion, and it's people remember it so differently. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I think Lem Sissay uses that as a definition of a family, is a series of contested memories. I don't know if you know who Lem Sissay is. He's a Vice Chancellor of Manchester University these days, but he had a tough upbringing and he didn't have a family, which is why to define a family as a series of contested memories is such an astonishing thing. And Leonard, you're looking like you don't know Lem Sissay. Go and read one of Lem Sissay's poems. I will give you the gift of Lem Sissay's Invisible Kisses, which is a wonderful, happy poem.
Thank you.
You'll find it on the internet somewhere. Are there any other questions?
I would just ask then if anyone does know anyone with particularly good memories to do with nature and landscape to give us a shout, because that's an area that we haven't got so much on and we would like to collect more in the future. A bit like John from Leighton Moss, you know, and his experiences working in that landscape. And it's connected to the Back on Our Map project we're working on as well, so with the University of Cumbria. So any good suggestions, please send them our way. We'll add them to the archive.
Well, I was going to show you the bottle that I referred to earlier. So here is one of these bottles, and it has on it, can we see that? I need to bring a light closer. Can you see it? It has a star on it. There you can see the star. So the star is just there. And so you get a sense of how big the bottle is. And this is the bottle that we find still around the bay. These were the bottles that came off the River Dance when it floundered. There was a cargo of these. So we know exactly what date these are from, and as I say, we're still finding them in nooks and crannies in the bay, and so they provide a kind of interesting piece of recent history, and I don't think we've got in the collection the history of the rescue of the people from the River Dance, but I know some of the people who are involved in that, so that's another story that we need to capture. But I show you this bottle. It's a bit cobwebby because I've just been to ferret it out of my box room to remind you that we want to clean up our beaches Obviously, if you find one of these bottles, it's kind of fun and kind of interesting to keep one because it has a story to it. But in general, we want to clean up our beaches. We want to remove the plastic from the beaches. And that's what this vote is about. So if I could just make a last request that Michelle pop up the slide with the voting details. And if any of you are part of networks or groups, or you've got a discussion group or an email list that you can share on our appeal to vote, we'd really, really appreciate that. And just be absolutely terrific. So once again, a huge thank you for everybody for being part of the Sunset series. We're going to do some more. We're just putting together the next series of programs. So I hope it won't be too long before we're all coming together again. And we're looking forward to seeing you all again, and fingers crossed, we've got until the 22nd of noon on the 22nd. It's a midday deadline on the 22nd of October to get more votes than those Brazilian paddlers. Thank you all once again, and have a lovely evening, and we'll see you all soon, I hope. Bye-bye.